Hi, Ruby. Thank you so much for being part of our series on Black and Asian queer identities. You are the fourth and final interviewee. So, yeah, thank you very much for making the time. I wonder if we could start with you just explaining a little bit more about your background, about who you are, what you do, and then we'll go a bit more into detail after that.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Ruth. It's an absolute pleasure. So thank you for the invitation to have a little conversation, perhaps about what I do and where I come from and how that fits in with, the important work that all of us try and do within the LGBT world. I'm from India. I was born in India. My father's work was such that we travelled a lot around India. So India is a very vast country, with complex cultural kind of ways of living from state to state. It's a different language, it's a different religion. And so those early years were really formative for me for being in different environments, learning to not necessarily assimilate, but learning to engage and to be a part of wider communities. So that was really important background for me. Brought up a Catholic, a very important sense of identity for me, and certainly um, one of the things I remember, I didn't at the time, but memory is kind of triggered by lots of things that happen. One of the earliest memories I have about the LGBT world, the word even itself, perhaps my parents didn't use it, but we lived it. My father was in the Air Force, so we lived in Air Force camps. And I remember my mother talking to her friends. They come for tea and they play mahjong or whatever, and they were talking about a friend who lived down the road who was gay.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't use the word gay, and they said, and they were genuinely loved him and his wife, and they said, "Isn't it sad that he cannot be the person he wants to be?" That he's constrained by society and regulations and rules. And looking back, and I remember the kind of love and compassion that these women were, sharing about this person that they very much
So he
cared
was
for.
married in an opposite sex.
Yes, he was married. Had two children my age, so we used to play with them. And they remained good friends. I mean, just fast tracking forwards, husband and wife remained good friends. She knew he was gay. They talked a lot about it. And I think when the kids were grown up and went off to work stuff, they kind of separated, but they remained friends right to the end. And that was really wonderful kind of experience, I think, looking back on it now, and influence it had on my.
It's very hard, isn't it, on everyone involved, I think, that kind of situation, because the woman also doesn't feel kind of fully loved I mean, maybe that's common for many women anyway. If you, for example, are in an arranged marriage, maybe you're not necessarily loved in that way either. It's just kind of, I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of that because I was too young to appreciate it. But the testimony, I suppose, in terms of their relationship, was that they remained the best of friends throughout. They supported each other in the choices that they made, separate from being married to each other. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful kind of experience.
Oh, we've lost you slightly there. There we go.
Life to live in traumas, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, and the other thing about my identity in terms of who I am, and I'll explain to you in a minute why this is about the impact of it, is that my father was from the state of Goa, which was under Portuguese rule, and my mother from main India, where the British were. And on my mother's side, the three elder brothers were all to a greater or lesser degree involved in the National Liberation Army, the Indian National Army, which was to liberate India from the British. And my father from Goa liberated, the Goa from the Portuguese. So that sense of belonging and identity was really, really important, and not to be, colored by outside influences. So I always remember that as, for my parents, for us to know and appreciate who we are. And I have to say, with all the traveling we did, the nuclear family was so important, because no matter where we were, parents and my brothers, because we hardly ever saw our relatives, because we were always in different parts of India and the world. So when we came here, my father by then had become a commercial pilot, and he got a 3-year posting to London. And after 3 years, at the point my brothers were in boarding school, I was here. My mother was always distraught having to see her sons go off, and they come here on holiday. And a week before they were supposed to go back, my mum went running to my school and spoke to the headmaster and said, "Can my sons join?" And he said, "Of course." And that was it. My mother, my brother stayed on for school. We were here. After 3 years, my father had to go back. And my mother made this momentous decision to stay on for our education. So, in a different country, different landscape with 3 teenagers, must have been incredibly difficult for her. So those 3 years turned into 55 years, and we're still here. We never went back. And I have 3 brothers and myself, and my parents had 6 of us. Out of the 6 of us, only 1 took up British citizenship. So the rest of us hung on to our Indian identity and our passports. We never changed that. India doesn't recognize dual nationality, and we didn't want to renounce that. So because of the Commonwealth, we could come, we could stay, and have indefinite leave to stay. So that was very important to me, to hang on to that sense of who you are. And that sense of who you are is something we always didn't just accept. We analysed, we questioned, to really begin to understand who we are. Certainly for me, having studied history, that sense of understanding of the political landscapes that were meant to shape you. And a good example of how it shaped us, I think very negatively in some ways, but in other ways really positively, was that when my parents were growing up, they weren't allowed to study their own mother tongue, only could study English. So when my father met my mother, they spoke their own mother tongues, but not each other's. So they communicated in English. So that's what we were brought up with. So sadly, because we traveled all the time, my mother never got the chance to, speak her own language. She always had to speak the language of the state, or speak in English or whatever. So that for me is a big loss. I speak Hindi, yes, I do, but not, a language that I speak every day. I certainly don't speak my mother's mother tongue, because she never spoke it at home. So I feel a huge loss in that. But, you kind of make things work for you, you adapt, and you're kind of flexible with that. So, yeah, so 3 years became 55 years, and here I am.
And so you're still close to your family, your siblings, and that?
I'm very close to, my parents passed away very close to each other 18 years ago. And I had 3 elder brothers. I think when, you face that trauma of loss of parents, and they were 7 weeks apart, my parents lost the deaths. And so I think it kind of shook established network to the ground. And, all kind of, residual memories keep coming back. And I think my brothers, certainly I had a lot to kind of deal with, and I think we kind of separated and we're back together again. But yeah, it took a while for us to figure out and navigate our way separate from our parents, who were very, very integral in our lives.
Yeah, it's a very tough thing to go through.
Yeah.
I know from experience with my parents that my mum, it's been a long time, but my mum still suffers from the loss of her parents.
Yes.
It's hard. Yeah. I've just noticed, Ruby, actually, that we've got the same colour walls.
Oh yes,
haven't we? Pretty much. We do.
Yes,
it's not the light, is it? You've got yellow walls.
No, it is yellow. Yes.
Good choice.
Just trying to bring a bit of sunshine in bleak days. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And apparently it's good for concentration. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's in my study.
Yes. Indeed.
Anyway, thank you. That's brilliant. Okay, moving on to the next question then. So could you tell us a little bit more about kind of the work that you do now as a campaigner? And I think you're a lecturer. Is that what I've picked up from Googling?
Well, I was.
Okay.
I set up my own video production company many moons ago, a little cooperative in Hammersmith, and it was an Asian women's video production company. So we were very much looking to work with Asian women. And this is the time of Ken Livingstone, you know, who was in the GLC, and he was really amazing in supporting and encouraging women, refugees, asylum seekers in those days. You know, they weren't seen as a big contingent group to kind of support. And every borough had at least one media video production arts group. You know, it was phenomenal, the kind of activity and work that was going on. So we had ours in Hammersmith, and we used to do a lot of training and production work. And through that, I mean, before that, I'd been doing freelance work training, and decided to once we kind of broke up, I suppose we'd been doing it for 8 or 9 years, and that's when I met my first encounter in a same-sex relationship. Up to that point, I think didn't want to know about relationships. Too busy with my work. So it was a really exciting time. You know, you create your own work style, lifestyle, and what you're going to do and how you're going to work, and it was very, very, very enjoyable. And through that, I was asked if I would go and do, you know, a lecture at a university. And I thought, well, it's part of what I do. And then I was asked if I'd go back and do a little bit more. And then I became a visiting lecturer at what was then London Guildhall University. It's now called London Metropolitan. And in those days, you know, they were always looking for people who worked in industry to come and talk and share their experiences. And one thing led to another, and suddenly I was lecturing at the university and eventually became a senior lecturer. And I'd never, ever planned to be a teacher, a lecturer. I'd never done petals or any of those things. But in those days, you could come in with your industry experience. It was fantastic. And the thing I loved most about the job was that I became a academic advisor to students, you know, so you saw to their pastoral needs. So I'd have a whole cohort that I'd see through the 3 years. Sometimes it took students longer, up to 5 years, because of issues that they had. But it was that sense of understanding the student and supporting them through their study years that was really, really powerful kind of experience, you know, that when they finally graduated and took their, you know, their award, you knew the struggles they'd been through. So it was a very wonderful, wonderful kind of job. But I live in West London and university was in East London, so that commute every day, the slowest line, the district line, where it would always break down. You know, signal failure seemed to be the norm of each travel day. I decided to leave, not because of the travel was too much, but the system was changing. You know, the government was putting the squeeze, they were giving less and less money, and they wanted less investment in, you know, high bespoke courses like silversmithing or, you know, instrument making or furniture. They just wanted cheap as chips, you know, programs where just students sat and listened to a lecturer remotely rather than investing money in the program. And I hated that. And the man who was brought in to make the cuts was my online boss. I'm sure he was a very nice man, but I just disliked intensely why he was there. And our jobs were ring fenced. Our whole department was safe. But I said, I cannot do this in all conscience. I have to leave. You know, I was part-time permanent, but I had my other freelance work, so I left. And really, at that time, bubbling away, I suppose, was that's more or less, I suppose, also when my parents passed away, which was quite a difficult time. And it's at that point, I guess, you know, when you have those seminal moments where something disruptive happens, you kind of stop and look at your life. And I was kind of, I suppose, in my mind, I'd slightly compartmentalized, you know, my sexuality and my faith, and they were both really important to me, and I never hid it. My parents knew, my friends knew, but I just wanted to explore that more deeply, and that's when I got more involved in the LGBT side. I kind of did the usual, you know, on the computer, gay, woman, Asian, Catholic, and all these organizations came up, and most of them I knew because of the work I did in the community sector. But this organization called Quest came up, and I thought,
I was going to say, do you know Quest? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, who are they? I've never heard of them.
One of our partners.
Yes, that's right. So I joined the London group, and became the women's officer,
Mhm.
and then became the national women's officer. And I think it's that old story that when you join and you ask too many questions, you're either seen as a troublemaker or somebody who's interested, and then they give you things to do, give you responsibilities. So I became deputy chair of the organization, and then I was actually chair of National Quest for 8 years.
Mhm. So which years were they? Which time?
I left Quest 4 years ago now. Well, I stepped down as chair.
It might be that we just didn't quite cross.
Right, right, yes, yes. And Gerard Swan, who's now the chair, had been on the committee before I became chair. He was secretary, I think, at the time, and then he left. And he's come back in again, which is great. So there's a great sense of continuity because he understands the history and how things have moved on. Very nice. And then I got involved with the global network of Rainbow Catholics, which is still very young. It's well, not yet into its 8th year. 2014 was the first meeting that was had, and then 2015 we had our first assembly, and then we got constitution worked out, and I'm the co-chair of that.
That's Global Network of Rainbow Catholics.
Global Network of Rainbow Catholics,
I'm just writing it down because I will share that with people because I've never heard of that.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's as it says, it's a network of LGBT Catholic member groups all around the world. So in all the 5 regions, we've got member groups, and we've got associates, so individuals who also want to support the work that we do. And what we do is we try to highlight the issues that our member groups are facing around the world, and to give them a platform and a voice. So we're not a campaigning group, we're just a support group, and we have assemblies every 2 years. So in in October, we've got our assembly in Mexico, and that's when I stepped down as co-chair because I would have done it for 6 years. So that's long enough, I think. Someone else can take over. And out of that, I've also been involved with, or not involved with, I set up 2 groups in India, first 2 LGBT Catholic groups. One that I'm currently involved with, and then the chair is called Bridge and Embrace. So we're very much it's a completely different, with each country it's different, I know. In India it's tends to be quite conservative in its politics. The church doesn't get challenged too often. There are many amazing LGBT campaigners in India. They're fantastic, but they don't do faith because the church doesn't recognize them. So they walk away from their faith. And that's been my biggest struggle, is trying to find LGBT Catholics. If they are gay, then if they're Catholic, they're practicing Catholics, and they're gay, they don't deal with the gay bit. They're not open about it. They just say, well, my church loves me, I love my church, and that's it. They're not particularly interested in reaching out to those who are struggling with their faith because of their sexuality. So we decided that rather than, and I've tried for about 8 or 9 years to identify people who would come, who would be able to be slightly open about their sexuality and their faith, and to campaign or to work. It was a struggle. So we decided to take the other route, which is to talk directly to the church. And it's amazing how many bishops are interested in working with us. There's a lot of work that's done for the trans community in India. It's huge, and churches are very involved. In fact, we've got a wonderful a nun, Sister Prema, who works with trans community. She just so the church is very interested in dealing with the marginalized, those who are really cut out from society. There's a small contingent who are Christian. I don't actually know what the Catholic trans person does. I don't know if they leave, they go abroad or something, but certainly the majority of trans are either Hindu or Muslim, or they become part of a trans community that don't do faith. So the church is really interested in dealing with them, but in terms of the marginalized in their own parishes and in the church, in the pews, they don't even want to acknowledge that they're there, that it is a huge problem. So it's wonderful that, as I say, with Bridge and Embrace, we've got this channel of communication that's going on. And for us, it's about, I don't want to use the word teach or to patronize them, but to say, look, there's a language you can use, there's a way of affirming people, and there's a way of making them welcome. Because what's happening is these people are leaving the church. You're hemorrhaging, the parishioners, the faithful. So I'm very pleased that those conversations are going on. What's the other thing I do? Oh, the other is that I've become the chair of the LGBT Catholics Westminster group, which has had a mass in Westminster for nigh on a decade now.
Yeah.
And that's based at Mayfair. It used to be in Soho, but it had to move.
I was going to say, is that the same as the Soho one? Okay.
That's right. It used to be at Warwick Street. There were so many complaints from this group called Ecclesias A Pontificat, which is run by a woman called Daphne MacLeod. I think she was a teacher, and I think she was either English or religious education. I don't know. And they used to come every fortnight and stand outside the church and pray, sing a few hymns, and then they'd go. But it was when the evangelicals would turn up, that's when it would become quite hairy, to the point where they'd burst into the church and chant, and the police would have to get involved. And it just became too much of a problem because the complaints were endless.
Is this evangelical Catholics or evangelical Protestants?
Anyone's evangelical would come. In fact, I remember this lovely incident where there was this woman who was new to the group. I would go out and talk to the group, and I saw this woman there, and I said, "Oh, hello," and that's right, I was doing a bit of filming, and she was listening to the people who were responding, and afterwards she was in the church, and she came down for a cup of tea, and I said, "Hello, weren't you out there, protesting?" She said, "No, I thought I'd come to a group about anti-abortion. I couldn't believe that they were complaining about you as LGBT. I think it's outrageous. I'm with you. I'm not with them." So it was quite funny having those conversations. But it wasn't funny in that the group would write endless letters to the parish priests, to the bishops, to the archbishop certainly, and to the Vatican. And this went on for years, and it just became a problem for the church that they didn't want to have to deal with something like that when they felt they had much bigger things to deal with, which was abuse going on in the church or whatever.
So the protesters were Catholic protesters?
Oh yeah, they were Catholics, yeah. And so the mass got moved to Farm Street, which is a Jesuit centre, so it's a Jesuit order, and they're not under the auspices of the diocese, so people can come and complain, but no one's going to listen. So there are no protests at all.
Much safer then for people.
It's yes, it's a mass that Vincent Nichols, the Archbishop, supports. It's there on the diocesan website, so it's the official provision from the diocese. And the Jesuits are wonderfully supportive of the mass. I mean, the problem is when it was in Soho, it had a different collection of people who came, or a larger grouping of people came, because it's a spiritual in the different sense, in the temporal sense, of the gay community. That's where it's in Soho, and after mass there were plenty of places to go and socialize and have a conversation. So the trans community were very, very, very there, very present. The women's groups were very much there. It was a lovely mix of people. But when it moved to Farm Street, which is Mayfair, which is the exact opposite to, sort of, what's the word, edgy Soho, very, very expensive on that market. So a lot of people felt very uncomfortable there, so they stopped coming for the mass, and they've gone somewhere else. But it's there. However long we can stay there. Yeah, it's open-ended.
It's good that it's continuing, but it's a shame that you've kind of lost some people along the way because of it.
Yeah, and I think with everyone having gone through COVID, the journey that people have to make to re-engage with society and with communities is still going to take a
Mhm.
long while to get. I don't think it'll go back to the way it was. It'll be different, but it'll happen. That people will do things differently. And I think also, to be honest, when it was the only mass available in England, people would come from huge distances. They come from Bristol, they come from Leicester, Bradford, because it was the only thing available. But
Mhm.
now there are about 7 different masses around the UK,
Mhm.
so people have choices, so they don't have to travel that far.
Yeah, it's a we have done some work with Catholics in different ways at Inclusive Church, but it is a really difficult one in terms of churches signing up. We did have one that signed up in York, but then
Yes.
the bishop wasn't happy, so they had to withdraw their,
Right.
membership of the network. Um, so yeah, it's a difficult one because it's a very hierarchical structure in the Catholic Church. If the bishop tells you that you can't join this network, and doesn't like it, then you can't do it. But we have worked with, I don't know if you know National Justice and Peace Network, we've worked with them, we've done
Yes,
workshops there,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And we had Ruth Hunt, of course, for
Yes,
one annual lecture.
that's right. I mean, it probably is something you're going to ask me in a little bit, but there was a time when I was chair of Quest, and there was Tracy Hunt from One Body, One Faith, and then Ruth Hunt at Stonewall. So we had this little triumvirate of women leading these
Yes, yes.
organisations. It was wonderful how we kind of were able to engage and work together and do some excellent work. All 3 of us have stepped down for different reasons, and so that kind of sense of leadership by women isn't
Mhm.
really there, at least in these 3 groups, and it was really important period, I think, because I think there was a lot that happened, and seeds were sown, and now things are beginning
Mm.
to really grow.
Tracy Byrne, wasn't it, I think?
Tracy Byrne, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes,
And it was LGCM and then One Body.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, and certainly One Body, One Faith now continue to work very closely with Quest, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've done some things as a partnership group, really, of which Quest was a part.
Yeah.
Like the recent letter we did, kind of supporting the conversion therapy ban.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had conversations. We've tried to do things together with One Body, One Faith. Also, Open Table, who are on our board now as
That's
well.
right. Warren,
Yeah.
yes, I know them well. Yeah, yeah.
So there's a few of us doing different types of
That's right. That's right. And then
things.
there's Jane O'Zane, with her foundation.
Yeah, and there's some other denominational ones as well. We've got the Methodist one. Can't remember, Dignity and Worth, and the Baptist one, Affirm, as well. So there's a few kind of different groups working on LGBT things, and then of course Inclusive Church is also a bit intersectional as well. Well, very intersectional. So yeah, that's just kind of one area of work we do with partners, but we've got other bits and bobs as well going on. Yeah, so thank you. Okay, that's really, really interesting. That gives us a good insight into what you're doing and where you've come from. So kind of more on a personal note as well, what is your experience of being somebody who is both queer and Asian, and Catholic as well, in the UK, in the church in the UK, etc.?
I don't know that I've ever felt that sense of rejection. Or maybe I'm just the kind of person who refuses to be rejected, refuses to acknowledge it, and just tries to find different ways of navigating life and the work that I do. But I'll give you an example. When I was in my first long-term relationship, and inevitably you go through periods of difficulty, and I remember going for confession to my church, the family parish where I was still often seeing my parents, and I remember going for sacrament of reconciliation, as it's called, and I was sitting in this little room with the parish priest there, and I was saying, Father, things are they're getting a bit fractious, and sometimes getting very angry and don't know how to deal with it. And he was very nice. He was listening away, and he said, and what does he have to say about it? Meaning my partner. And I looked at him and said, but he's a she. And he kept looking at me. He said, "Okay." He said, "But that's not the issue, is it? The gender isn't the issue. It's what you're going through." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is wonderful what he's saying." I didn't realize I was coming out to him, but in the conversation, what he was saying was, "That's absolutely fine. It's not about the gender. It's about the relationship and the problems." And I thought, this is wonderful. So that was my first experience, I suppose, with the church, and any sense of judgment that could have happened then. It didn't. And subsequently, I think in all the work that I've done, I've not and certainly my parents, my mother, was a bit jealous, I think, of my partner and had a resistance to her, although, my partner was always there. My father thought she was the best thing since sliced bread because he was running his business. She was a business advisor and they got on really well. They shared a birthday and all of that. With my mother, it was difficult because she had mental health problems. So, you couldn't rationalize certain things with her. She was trying to be very protective of her family. She felt people were trying to hurt us. And through her illness, I think I tried a couple of times to talk about my sexuality, and she got very agitated. And I thought, this is not fair on her. This really isn't. She loves me, and she knows I love her, and that's what really matters. And so we just kind of navigated a path that worked for her. But my brothers knew, everybody knew, they were fine with it. So I'm never, and in I suppose the areas that I worked in, which was education and media, that sense of identity and acceptance is very, very important. Hugely important. So it was never an issue for me. If anything, I think my gender has been a problem for a lot of men in the circles that I've moved in.
Right.
They don't want to relinquish power, if you like, because they've got it, and the sense of trying to get them to see things with a different lens, it can be very difficult. But in terms of one of my brothers is a staunch Marxist, so he was the one who would go out and march, and he'd paint, graffiti everywhere, and he faced a lot of hostility, a lot of racism, and I guess the path I took, and perhaps the choices I made of the people I hung out with and worked with, I never experienced that directly. I know many, many people have, and that's the battle, isn't it? To not see things through your own lens, but to understand and experience other people's pain and hurt, and to offer them a way to minimize the pain and hurt that they face. So yeah, I guess also I have to say that when I joined Quest, when I became chair of Quest, I made a decision then that I would meet with we had local groups then our regions, but so I would meet the bishop everywhere that we had a local group, just to say, look, here we are, and we want to know what you can do for us. We'd really like some support. And I think what helped was perhaps this is maybe the first time that they were dealing with a woman, and that too a woman of color from the LGBT community. They'd always dealt with men, and the men had faced real pain and discrimination growing up, and it was a pain that needed somehow to be addressed and then supported. And I think the church found it very difficult to do that openly. But I was coming in from a different route and saying, listen, I know the history, but I want to know in terms of where we're at now and how we can move forwards. What's the path that we can create? And I think I was slightly giving them a more kind of easy route, to say, well, you're the experts in faith and we're the experts in LGBT, let's see how we can work together. I have to say there was a particular gentleman who, it wasn't planned, it just so happened that he went and met two of the bishops that I was about to meet, and he was a pretty angry man. So he sat there and he just hurled abuse and screamed at these bishops. So I think when I turned up the following week, there was like, oh, what a relief! This is so nice. I'm not being shouted at, and I've often said this. I have a very dear friend from New Ways Ministry, Francis de Bernardo, and I remember him doing a talk because I've often described myself as having this attitude, and he said, listen, whenever we do work, we sometimes have to take that Pollyanna stance, which is everything is okay let's work with this. Everything can be okay. Let's deal with the positives. And I think that's what I try and bring into it, rather than seeking out the problems, I try to go beyond that. Um,
Find the hope.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
That thing about, thinking laterally, there's a great big wall that, instead of bashing our heads against it, let's try and find a different route to where we need to go. That's not to deny that the wall isn't there, it exists, but do we allow the wall to affect everything we do? And so it's just about finding different ways of doing things. So, from those conversations, we have, our group in Nottingham, we're able to have the Mass, which continues with the Archbishop there. In Salford as well, we have that, and in Bristol. And those, were about having those conversations and exploring very quietly and creating initiatives. So, it's good. It's good these things are happening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Very interesting.
I just also want to say one more thing. I work, my paid job is with an organizer. Well, it's a group called Landings. It started in America about 50 years ago. I've been in England for about 35 years. And it's for baptized Catholics who left their faith. And now they've made a decision that they want to re-engage with their faith. And that group, Landings, is based at Farm Street, where the LGBT Mass is. And there was always a sense of, oh, you're working on something that the church approves, you've got to try and keep it separate from your LGBT work, particularly your Quest work. Well, now I'm the chair of the Westminster group, the Westminster LGBT group, and I'm there at Landings. So I'm kind of, doing both things very openly. And there isn't an issue on that, at all. However, I do know that the next diocese, as you may have heard about the author, I forget his first name, Green, who was going to do a talk and sign books. He writes these little romance books on men, on young boys, and he was invited to come to the school to Paul Fisher School, I think it's called. And the chaplain there didn't like it. And the chaplain wrote to all the parents and kicked up a stink. And then the right wing, was it Catholic Truth in Scotland, kicked up a fuss. And then all the parents started writing to the bishop, Archbishop John Wilson, and they shut the whole event down. Governors had to resign.
Right.
Naturally, if I had my Quest hat on, I would go and have a conversation. But because I'm seen as employed in the Westminster diocese, do I go and talk in the other diocese about what's going on? So it's a kind of tricky, path to navigate, and I have to kind of speak to other people and say, look, this is what I'm going to do. I hope you don't have a problem. And then I have to go and talk to a bishop who normally sees me with my Landings hat on, and he's saying, oh, I have to now think of you as the LGBT bit. So yeah, I think for them it's more of a struggle. Sorry?
I was going to say, I wish people really had hats. We always talk about the hat and
Take them off. I mean, I haven't got a problem with hats. I think it's just the perception of the other, of trying to separate things out and then not seeing the work that we're doing at Landings in a negative light. It's just politics, which is a bit messy sometimes.
So it's Landings, like as in, the landing in your house with an S.
Yes, Landings. Yeah.
Landings UK, and is it an international thing? Did you say?
Yes, it started in America. It's very big in Singapore, Thailand, Australia, a few other countries. Nowhere in Europe apart from England. Yeah, and it's run by lay people, so no priest, nuns involved. It's just a compassionate listening sessions with people who've never had the opportunity to talk about faith, and just supporting them on their journey. So for each person, it's different how they re-engage with their faith, and we ask them at the end, what is it that you want now?
So it's a Catholic thing from the States,
specifically for Catholics. Yes, yeah.
I'm just making little notes, because then what I can do is when I share the video, I can, I can put some resources and some different things underneath for people. So kind of moving on, where are we in terms of time? We've probably done about 40 minutes. So I'm not quite sure when we started, but what do you think about intersectional theology? You know, the importance of doing theology from the perspective of marginalized groups and communities. What would you say about that? You know, why do you think it's important, and if so, why?
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, I'm no theologian, so I'm going to probably struggle with using the right words. But certainly for me, in terms of faith, I think it's so important to understand the uniqueness of each person, and the cultural environment that they come from. The regional political climates that impact on their engagement with faith. And certainly, I think with the Catholic Church, we always gravitate towards Rome. That Eurocentric view of what's said and how it should be. And well, the Catholic faith as it's lived out in Brazil is going to be very different to the way it is in China, to the way it's in India or Africa. And it's about trying to understand that London is this amazing cosmopolitan city with all these cultures that inhabit this space and who live their lives in their homes, at least, in a very unique cultural environment. But when they come into the wider world, the community, they have to kind of assimilate and struggle for them as if they have a particular faith tradition within their Catholic faith, yet they're having to do something that's very middle class or very conservative or very European. It's a struggle. So it's lovely that there are churches that do have masses for the African communities, for the Indian communities, for the whatever communities. And of course that's the thing that's supported, whether it's Spanish, Italian or whatever, or French church, with all those masses that are there. Yet when the very idea of having a mass for the LGBT community, people go, well, why do you need a mass for yourselves? Can't you just come to an ordinary mass? And it's about saying, if you can respect someone, and in order to respect them, you have to recognize and affirm their uniqueness, then surely, if that is understood, then you would want to stop talking to someone in English when they can't speak English. Speak to them in their language, or allow them to speak in their own language, and allow them to celebrate their faith in a way that works for them. And so that's really important to me. Every organization I've been in, I've looked around and said, why is it that we're not reflecting society out there? Invariably they tend to be white, male and middle class. Where are the women? Where are the people of color? Where are the trans? And it's about constantly reminding people that change needs to happen. And it's a discomfort, when you put that to people, because they're so used to doing things in a particular way. No one's ever questioned it because they're all the same, and they continue to repeat the pattern of familiarity. And yet when someone comes along and says, yes, but, don't tell me about what's here. Tell me about what's not here. Recognize, find out what's not here, and let's try and work that out. And fulfill that sense of a vacuum. Let's fill it with the requirements. And that's always a difficulty. I understand that. But you can't be static. You can't just become this fossilized organization. So I know that invariably in any group that I'm in, that I'm seen as slightly difficult. I hope I'm saying it in a nice way, a kind way, a gentle way, a productive way. But accepting that this is how things have always been. It doesn't sit comfortably with me.
Sometimes it doesn't matter how we say things, we're still a challenge to people, and people don't like necessarily to be challenged. So they see you as difficult, however you say things sometimes.
Sure.
But we're not in the, I feel like we're not in the, the job is not to work with people who are completely averse to working with this, and changing. I think you work with the people who are open-minded enough to hear. So that's the benefit of speaking more gently. Is the ones that are on the edge are more likely to listen, maybe, and hear and change.
Yes, and it's really difficult. It's very different for the global network of Rainbow Catholics GNLC, because we are global, because we've got it written into our constitution about representation. So we've got all of that on board level. We've got our member groups from all over the world. But in terms of women coming through, in terms of trans people coming through, taking up leadership roles. It's been a problem. There's been this lacuna, so we've tried to change the constitution to incorporate that, and certainly for the youth to come through. And that's really important that happens. You can't be a global organization and just on one level. It's got to be as diverse as possible, and of course that creates huge problems. But then through those problems, positivity comes through, and amazing things happen. And that's great. It's a big challenge we have, and we work on it. But when I look at the various organizations I've worked on here, trying to, it's. I'll give you an example. Quest is coming up to 50 years. It's going to be 50 years old. It was started by some amazing young men. Okay, they started, and it was incredible, and they've grown old as the organization has grown old. So changing a mindset, of how things were done has to be done gently, has to be done firmly but gently. It just needs to happen. So we've got, it was wonderful that we would have trans people on our committee, the Quest committee. We had a parent on the committee. We had, people of color, and it was great that those changes happen. And the membership grows as well, because if you see people in leadership roles, you think, oh well, look, she's like me, or he's like me, or they like me, and this is
This
great.
organization is for me. Basically.
This is for me. Yeah, you're sending out messages, and it's great. But otherwise, it's very difficult. But I have to say, the biggest challenge for me is about the lack of women who come through. It seems that when women go to an organization and they see men, they leave. They don't stay. And I can't tell you the amount of times women have said to me, "But why are they all men here?" And I say, "This because you don't stay." If you don't stay and occupy that space, it will be taken up by someone else, and it'll be the men. And that's the hardest struggle, is to encourage women to come on board and to work. Sometimes I find it's a really lonely space that I occupy, and I just wish, and I'm not saying that the men aren't supportive, because I've had the most amazing supportive men who've been there, I've been able to talk to in all the organizations I work for. But it'd be wonderful if I could have women just saying, let's have a conversation, Ruby, about how we can make change happen, rather than me having to find women to have a conversation who will stay for a little bit and leave.
It's very hard work and heavy work sometimes, just being the token person, of any kind of group. It's like a lot of people of color say that when they're the token person on the board, it's quite heavy lifting, because you're basically representing an entire huge group of people. It's probably the same if you're a very solitary woman on these kind of things, And women, like, people attract people. So if you see more young people, you're more likely to get through. If you see more women will come along. And it's a long and hard job. It's hard work to get to diversify things sometimes. But it's worth it, isn't it, in the end?
Yeah.
Right. Could you tell us maybe about some activists and writers that you recommend, that you admire?
Gosh, I've been so privileged in my association with Quest, with the Westminster LGBT group, and certainly with Global Network of Rainbow Catholics, because the most powerful, amazing people that I've engaged with, who are in my years growing up, I would have never dreamed about the opportunity of meeting with them, and I have, and it's been wonderful. Brian Massingale, who's a priest in America, openly gay priest. He only came out about 5 years ago, I think, is the most amazing orator. He just, he holds you spellbound when he speaks. Absolutely wonderful man from Fordham University, written some wonderful, wonderful articles, and a book as well, a couple of books actually. And then there's Sister Janine Gramick, from a co-founder of New Ways Ministry, an amazing, amazing woman who's done such hard work over the 50 odd years, vilified by the previous Pope, Ratzinger, and told her she had to stop her ministry, and was very much excluded. But she persevered and carried on. There were many great convents who said, "No, come work with us. You'll be okay." And Pope Francis has affirmed her and blessed her for the work that she's doing. So, wonderful woman.
Mm.
And then there's people like Chris Serra, who's a theologian from Brazil. Just the most amazing work. Very, very interested in intersectionality and about marginalization of gender and of women and all of that. Fantastic woman. I'm really kind of proud to work with her. And another person is Sister Prema from, I think I mentioned her earlier, from India. She's actually from the south of India, but she's working in the north in Assam with the trans community. She just happened to be on a bus one day and she saw a trans woman. No one would sit near her. It was a long bus journey and she was on her own. So she just went and sat next to her and started talking to her and say, tell me about your life. Tell me what struggles you have. And it just planted the seed in her head that this was a community she wanted to work with. And she's been doing it for about 10 years now. I managed to get the local, not the local, but the Archbishop there to agree to a house that she could run for trans women, to offer them training and education, just so that they can break that cycle of, the life that they are forced to live, and give them opportunities, to do wonderful work. So, yeah, wonderful, wonderful woman.
Yeah, giving people more opportunities in a kind of a society where maybe they don't have many.
Yeah.
That's really good. Thank you. And are there any, could you name like a book, maybe one book or two books that you might want to recommend as well to our listeners?
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the books that I've finished reading not so long ago is by an Indian author, Arundhati Roy, who had written, The God of Small Things. She wrote that 15 years ago, I think, which won many, many awards. And she writes very few books, but when she does, my goodness, they really blow you away. And I read her recent book called The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which is really this coruscating journey that you're on, which is really the history of India since it gained independence. But it's seen through the eyes of marginalized communities, specifically the trans community. And it's just the most visually stunning and graphic way that she describes their lives, their journeys, their stories. And there's lots of different characters, and they're all seemingly very, very separate, but in very subtle ways they all align and come together and you get the connection that actually she's talking about society and the differences and the categories within India, to do with race, to do with caste, to do with religion, to do with language, and how somehow this is what India is, this mass of seeming craziness and diversity. Very, very powerful book. It just kind of leaves you constantly referring back to the characters and the little kind of vignettes of places that she takes you to. But yeah, fantastic book. I love it.
She's a really great author, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's written a lot of kind of political essays and that.
She's an amazing political writer as well, and she feels there's much more mileage in doing that than writing books.
Yeah, that's why has she only written two, I think, maybe in terms of the novels.
Yeah,
it might just be those two, huh?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you are there any other Indian authors that you would like? Because I'm a bit of a fan of kind of Vikram Seth as well. And
yes, he's good, and I like William Dalrymple as well. I think he's great. I know he's not Indian.
I tried with Salman Rushdie. I don't know why. I just never got on. I just never got on with it. I found it cool.
I still haven't read Midnight's Children. No, I struggle with him. But,
there are some really great Indian authors, aren't there?
Yes, indeed.
Fabulous, brilliant. Okay, well, I think we'll kind of wrap it up then, unless there's anything else that you want to recommend, in terms of.
No, but maybe just in terms of podcasts. If people haven't come across The Tabard, that's really, really good, and that's by Vine and Fig, who do the most amazing work on, the kind of intersectionality of faith and religion and sexuality and all of that. And that's a really, really good thing.
And is that a Catholic podcast, or is it?
I think mainly, but no, I think they do Christian generally, but
ecumenical kind of
Catholic as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you could send me as well an email with all these things, because I might have written down and spelled
Okay,
things wrong. I
sure,
might not be able
sure.
to find them.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say it is quite funny, really. The other day we had to. Everybody was very excited. We had to at Farm Street. Prince Charles came along. It was all very secret, hush hush, and we were introduced to him, and everybody was over the moon of it. And I thought, well, yeah, very nice to meet you. I mean, he was a man, you have to respect him. But I never felt this level of excitement that I did when I was a kid, and I met Shirley MacLaine, who was my heartthrob. I loved her to bits. And I thought, who would excite me? Who would I really want to meet? And I know who it is. It's the Pope. If I met him, I admire him so much for what he's trying to do, which is to change the direction of the church and
Very,
bring the
very
smell of the
subtle,
sheep
yeah.
in. And I would absolutely love to meet him. Yeah, but
It's a juggernaut, isn't it? The Catholic Church. It's a very hard thing to turn around. That ship.
I know. It is tough.
It's a big ship.
But the thing is, he's given us permission to take ownership of change. And that's what the church is struggling with now, the hierarchy, who don't want to give up that power. But, we're headbutting it very gently. But yeah,
it is a good opportunity with this Pope, I think, definitely, to make some real change happen.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's a wonderful place to end, I think, on that hopeful note. Because we do, I'm not a Catholic myself, but I do know a lot of Catholics, and I wish for the best in terms of change and hope for marginalised people, and that's really good.
Indeed.
Good to hear about all your work, Ruby. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks very much. Then
all right.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.